our May, thank you, Human Relations Board meeting for the city of Battle Creek. I'm Kathy Zenda Wilson, happy to be your chair. Can we go ahead with roll call?
Sure. Chris Lucier, Derek Freeman, Amora Austin, Jeffrey Cotton.
Oh, you're getting all the folks that aren't here yet.
Jennifer Greger, Kathy Zenda Wilson,
Present.
Charles Asher,
Present.
Don Woodward,
Present, attending remotely from Kalamazoo.
thank you. Keona Ackley,
Present.
Jennifer Metzger,
I'm present.
Dina Spencer, Joe Hooper,
Present. Okay.
Whitney Wardell, Leanne Wesley,
I'm present. I'm joining remotely from San Diego, California.
Oh.
Hey.
Bunika Herring, Rebecca Fleury,
Present, remotely from Battle Creek.
Roger Ballard.
Present remotely from Battle Creek.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have quorum?
9.
Correct, we have 9. So
Thank
yes,
you.
we do. Mhm.
All right, thank you. So I will then ask for, oh, hi Dina. Wait, Dina has just joined us. If you'd like to do
10.
roll for her.
I'll let her have a seat first.
Dina Spencer, present in person in Battle Creek.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. So I'd like to ask for approval of the minutes that you received by email. They were from our March 15th, 2023 meeting.
So move.
Second.
Motion, support,
Second.
and we've got a second from Dina Spencer. Any further conversation on the minutes? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same. All right, thank you. Lisa, do we have any communications?
We have none.
All right, we have no committee reports. I'm gonna turn it over to Rebecca, who's gonna share with us any feedback or debrief from the discussion with the workshop, actually with the commission around the community review board. So we're into it. Rebecca?
Thank you, Kathy, and members of the board. I appreciate it. I am going to just kind of give a recap. First, let me just say, Chief Bagley sends his regrets. He has had a vacation this week on his schedule for a very long time, and we want our team members to take their vacation. So he is not able. So you get me. I can't say that I will be able to answer every question, but I will do my best. And those I can't answer, I will get an answer for the group if we get to that particular point. And also, Commissioner Ballard, if I'm saying something that doesn't reflect what you heard at the workshop, then please feel free to chime in. Because again, we're continuing this as a work in progress. And thank you for those who were able to attend. So on April 24th, we held a workshop with the City Commission to talk about. At that time, we were using the phrase Citizen Review Board, but the city proposed an alternate name, and I'll talk about that. So it was the first chance for Chief Bagley and myself to present our proposal to the commission, kind of for first consideration. I felt like it was a really good discussion. It started off with what we propose as a title was a community review and oversight board. And really that had a lot to do with the feedback we heard from all of you, the Human Relations Board, the survey that we got back, the connotations, both positive and negative, to using the word citizen to many of our neighbors in Battle Creek. And so started off with, that kind of proposed name. And so I don't really know if the acronym CROB is a good thing, but everybody has now just used CROB. So we'll go with that. So the chief and I had a chance to do a presentation with the commission. I'm going to highlight a little bit of that. But also I want you to know that Kerry Whitfield was there, and he stood up and talked about, where where we aligned and where we didn't align with the proposal that he had submitted that all of you have seen and that the commissioners had seen. I think what we wanted to point out right away was we had a lot of common themes around transparency and accountability. That was reflected in a lot of work that the Human Relations Board did. It certainly was throughout the proposal by the NAACP, and we believe it shows up in our proposal. And so we also, we also share the HRB recommendations, and I can go over those again if need be, but let me also kind of pause and say, you can see the recording of that workshop through the city's YouTube channel. And the presentation that we gave is also out on the city's website. So you could always pull that up at any time and see the discussion. Again, I'm going to stick to the highlights here. So we did, first of all, thank all of you and the committee for putting together your recommendations. And we also felt like we did our best to reflect those in the proposal as well. We shared in our presentation the areas in which we felt we aligned with the NAACP proposal. And then, of course, we knew that there was going to be some areas that we were not aligned. So, I mean, I could go through those, but really what I want to talk to you about is kind of what we heard. What would be most helpful, Kathy? I didn't know if we wanted, all of that is outlined in the presentation and can be seen on the recording. What would be most helpful for you here? Can I stick to kind of the direction we heard from the commission, or would the board like me to kind of walk back through that presentation?
So they received everything by email. I'd really love to hear from a couple members if there's a request for how Rebecca proceed. I know I feel pretty intimately prepared for that conversation, and I was in the room for the workshop, but I don't want to speak for the entire board. Does anybody have a suggestion or recommendation for Rebecca?
I think in the interest of time, that we have the ability to, I mean, I was there as well. Everybody has the ability to look at the YouTube video. So I think in the interest of time, just an overview by Rebecca.
Okay.
Right. Agree.
All right. And then if there's
Thank you
any
both.
questions anybody has, let's make this conversational. If there's anything that doesn't make sense to you or you need some framing, let's feel free to ask Rebecca for that.
Yes, please do. I do want this to be a conversation and not just a presentation, not just a presentation. Oh, I almost said preach. I'm sorry, Pastor Hooper. There was no negative connotation to that. But really, once we got through our presentation, and Carrie was able to freely converse during the workshop as well. That's one of the nice things about the workshop, is that it's a much more conversational setting, whereas city commission meetings are very business-like and very regimented. So I appreciated, the workshop as a chance for Carrie to share the highlights of his proposal, and then for Chief Bagley and I to kind of share where we aligned and where we had differences, and then why we had those differences. But really, as we presented all the materials to the commission, there was some very clear direction that came out. And it wasn't necessarily only from the city commissioners. There was also some things that we heard prior to the workshop that we did our best to address. Some of them came directly from Carrie, because Chief Bagley and I sat down with Carrie and went through our proposal, items that we were going to highlight in the presentation, and talk through some of the concerns he had right away. So I'll share a little bit about what that looked like. I think overall, the city commission appeared supportive of creating the community review and oversight board. But again, it was a workshop setting. So ultimately, it will go before the commission as a formal proposal in a resolution format. And then, that would be the commission's ultimate decision on creation. There was some great talk about a chapter that already exists in the city code. And it's funny, in my notes I wrote, don't forget to put the chapter number in. And I never put the chapter number in, so please forgive me. But Chuck, is it 276?
I think something like that. But for some reason, 282 is sticking in my mind, but it's in that
Okay, so
area.
I will get that for you, excuse me, but it
Yeah.
was in some of the materials that we shared. So the city
So
had
maybe-
actually, the city had actually created a similar body in a very relatively short period of time, and it was created by ordinance to kind of mimic what we had been talking about in a citizens review board, specifically for the police department. But then nothing happened. It was created. there was a discussion, and then it went dormant.
So we both-
So it was an excellent question. First of all, kudos to whoever dived through the ordinance, because some of us who have, I mean, that was created in the 80s. I think it was 1983. And, you know, that was certainly before my time. And if it's not in play, please know we don't go through the code of ordinances every day and quiz all of our people. I would probably not pass. I'd probably get the highlights, but I would have never known necessarily that that was there. So I appreciated having that discussion, and it was good to present that to the commission, because the city attorney shared that this review and oversight board could be created either via resolution or via an ordinance. And while I don't think that we have completely landed on an answer to that chapter that was brought up posed a good discussion. Because if we wanted the community review and oversight board to be created through ordinance, we would only need to amend chapter 276 to reflect that, or we would have to repeal chapter 76 and then add a new chapter for the community oversight and review board. So that's
It's
kind of
286, Rebecca.
286.
286.
Oh, so I had the
You're-
6 and you had the 8. Chuck, we make a good team.
Yeah, we're kind of in, but it's kind of in between what we thought. Also,
I
it's
know.
it's very easy to find if anybody wants to do on the city's website. It's just under administrative code 286, and it's what, a couple pages long, but it's pretty comprehensive.
It is. And so, you know, we were trying to do some, I guess, historical digging. And we got a lot of, hey, I think this was kind of the precipice for that, or this is what, you know, I don't believe that I have the exact story of why. However, it is currently in our administrative code, which is part of our code of ordinances. And, you know, we will have to address that at some point, depending on where the commission how the commission moves forward. So you know that is still a question. The next item that was brought up was that they, and actually Carrie brought this up, is they didn't feel that the language around the board members was clear enough that you don't have to begin a complaint process with the PD. You know, I think the goal from Carrie's position was any member of the Community Review and Oversight Board could be contacted by a resident member in the community about a concern. And that certainly made sense. And I think as we're working through the amended document, we have strengthened language around that area. I think what Chief Bagley was really clear about is that absolutely can happen, but the police department will have to get involved. I think there was this perception that a community, a board member could just run with an investigation. And that is not what we have proposed in the structure of the CROB. But we did certainly make some adjustments to say, absolutely, a community member, if they feel more comfortable at the onset, at the initial contact around a complaint, they could certainly reach out to any of the board members. Another clear comment we heard from the commission particularly is that the chief and I had proposed a 5-member board. But it was very clear from the commission and from community members that that was too small a number. I think from the chief's perspective and mine is, I think everybody knows that if a board gets too large, it makes it very difficult to advance things, and in some instances a quorum. But certainly heard that direction. And now we've had, is it going to be 7? Should it be 9? And make sure that representation of citizenry, community members, neighbors is the biggest voice. The city manager is not proposed to be a board member because ultimately that if any recommendation or action that the chief of police would take that the CROB board did not agree with could ultimately come to the city manager for final. So we are working through that, but I think we heard loud and clear 5 is too little, but it was somewhere between 5 and 9. So we continue to work with that. I was trying to bring up my board list, and I'm sorry, I'm just having a little bit of a glitch. There seems to just be a hiccup in my connection. So hang on just a second, and I can tell you kind of the representation of that board. So I can stop and pause if anybody has questions while I peek through, and I'm going to look this way because this is where my other monitor is. So please just give me one moment.
Anyone have any questions or comments while she looks for that? Welcome, Chris. Chris. Welcome, Monica and Derek. Yes,
I
Dina?
think the only question I have, and I'm looking at my notes from that day, so this will be an internal board, just like the HRB. This is not an external board,
Correct.
correct?
Rebecca? Yes.
Yes.
It just feels really different than what I feel like we originally talked about. Like, to me, it's just another internal city board, and not that there's not good things, but it's the babysitter babysitting themselves. Like, how are, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the complexity, and others can speak to this too, is that in order to have access to the information you need, it needs to be an extension of the city, right? So there's
Okay,
some logistical and technical challenges with that. I think the level of
Okay.
independence is gonna be dependent on who sits on the board and how
Okay.
it's connected, but a standalone comes with its own set of challenges. I mean,
Sure.
as the NAACP's proposal was positioned, it was a standalone nonprofit, which would have had its own board in
sure.
addition to its members of the board. And that
Mhm.
is just a whole other complicating
Sure.
factor. And the legal connection it would have with the police department was a
Okay.
struggle.
I just really want to make sure that this is not viewed by the public as just another city board doing the work of what the community is asking for.
Yep.
You know, I think it can be seen that way, and that's, you know, you don't want that. So,
One of the
just some food for
elephants in-
thought.
One of the elephants in the room is the subpoena power.
sure,
And I think you're only gonna get that if it's connected with the city. 'cause the
which
city-
makes sense. I just want to be really
That goes with it.
intentional as this comes together, like
Well,
what the
and let
public
me-
sees. Yeah,
Yeah, let me just share, right, no, this board would not have subpoena power, and I appreciate what you said, Kathy, and others, is that the legal ramifications of an independent board versus a
Mhm.
city board are
Sure.
big when it comes to these, because we do not want to violate the collective bargaining agreements of any of our officers to unions within the city, as well as there was a word the city attorney used, I'm not going to be able to use it, but as far as access to investigation materials is also another a big issue from a liability perspective that the city has concerns with, and thus this is why the proposal is the way it is. Every member of the CROB would have to sign a confidentiality statement and agreement to be able to participate, because it's not that we're not going to allow access to information, but that information has to be protected for both the rights of the officer, the community member, as well as the city. And that's where it can get complicated. But I think that's why when the commission gave us direction on what the board should look like, we did kind of mix that up. So one, there will be a city commissioner representative on the proposed board. There will also be the HR director, because there is the familiarity with employment issues, law, investigations, etc. But then all of the other members will be community members. And there was no specifications about a community member that has a law enforcement background or doesn't have a law enforcement background. It really will be by application, and then the members would be seated by the city commission. I think the commissioners were very intentional about that. We're clear, this is different than any other city board. I think the training requirements, the confidentiality, the access to information, this is a board that we're going to do everything we can not to turn over members, in a regular basis, because of there's just going to be a very large amount of material information to share up front to prepare for what could come, to the board for review.
Rebecca?
I think that, yeah, go ahead.
Fiona has a question.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry, thank you. I
one-
can't see you all very well. You're like little
You're
tiny
I'm gonna
good.
try and
ants.
manage it.
Oh,
Okay, thank you.
Just first a comment. Can we have the members that are joining us virtually, when they're not speaking, could they please be on mute? And second, I missed the makeup of the board after you stated the city commissioner, HR director, and what was the third piece?
They're all members of the community.
All members of the, thank you.
Yes. Now,
Can
the
I-
mayor did suggest that well, whether it's 7 or 9, the mayor wants to make sure that we have 2 alternate members on the board because schedules get very busy and we've been struggling in other boards and commissions to get quorum. So with alternates, they would have to get all of the training and information and et cetera, but wouldn't necessarily have to attend all of the board meetings unless we didn't have a quorum. And so an alternate could step in. But other than that, they would all be community members.
So Rebecca, that leads me to a question that I hadn't thought of before. With the Open Meetings Act, would this board be, would they not have to follow that same rule about it being an open meeting, and how do you get around that?
No, because it's an advisory board,
Okay,
they would not be subject to the Open Meetings Act.
because they're not voting on anything or making any decisions. They are advising that, okay.
Other questions? Again, thank you for helping me see everyone at the tables because I can't see all of them, all of you.
I
do
just
see the
I just
sunshine
had
now.
thought about that and just a thought, because I heard a lot of talk about transparency at the meeting. And I think we should make as much effort as we can to have open meetings. I know there's times we aren't going to be able to because we're going to be talking about employment matters, but I think we should be as open as we could possibly be.
I think that's gonna have to go into the formation of this as a thoughtful strategy around how it's discussed and what's shared.
Yes, and I hear you, Chuck, and I think that the intention is to be as transparent and accountable as possible. But you know, and I think all of you know that there will be times what this board is reviewing will not be. We've been,
Absolutely.
similar to the HRB is we run a hybrid schedule because, it's advisory in nature, but it doesn't mean that we should not be as open as we can. I don't think that the chief or I have any concerns with that, but I agree with Kathy that it will need to be kind of addressed at the formation, and I'll probably have to lean into legal because nobody wants to violate OMA, the Open Meetings Act. And where do we find the balance so that we don't, violate confidentiality?
That sounds fair.
Yep.
The other thing that came up during the workshop was cost. And I don't think any of us had really discussed or dug into, like, what are the training costs associated with this? What are the just the actual administrative costs that might go into this as well? So it felt like that was a question the commission wanted answered, so.
Yes, they did. And please bear with me. You might hear a 2-year-old in the background.
Oh, it's okay.
Yeah. Childcare. And I know Kathy, you can appreciate that. We
Yep.
try to share. So if he starts saying, "Whamma, where are you?" Well, that's me, and Grandpa's got it covered. You're right. Cost was probably something we didn't anticipate as a question, but we certainly are digging into it right now. So what we will, when we come back with an amended draft to the commission, we will have put some together. Commissioner Jake Smith had provided a document, but it was still helpful, but it was pretty old. So when we talk about putting costs together, I think that dates it will probably have to increase it some. But just for an example, something like putting a board member through the Community Police Academy that BCPD puts on is relatively small cost, but sending somebody to a legal training around investigative procedures and or interview interrogation, that's a couple $1,000s depending on where it's located and how it's administered. So the chief and I are putting together a potential training schedule for board members and then put costs associated with that and doing it in year 1, this is what it would look like. this is what we, anticipate as training needs, meeting needs, and et cetera. And these are the costs associated with it. I think we only have maybe a couple of other boards and commissions that would require this level of training to be able to carry out the duties. So we really want to make sure that we are including those costs for consideration by the commission. And somebody already asked me, well, how is that going to be handled? Well, it will probably come out of the city manager's budget and or the city commission budget for its inaugural period. And then we'll work to incorporate it into our priority-based budgeting community results, and then plan for that on an annual basis. Any other questions on cost?
Yeah, do other boards like this or similar boards belong to do they have any membership in any national organizations that might cost money? I'm just trying to think of some of the invisible costs that might be there. And I don't know, Paushan, when you did your research, was there anything in there that you saw about national membership to anything or connection to any groups?
Just NACOLE, NACOLE, which is the national body that's a very useful resource. So I'm not sure. We didn't really investigate membership details, but that's something we should be quite easily accessible.
I did see that they have a conference coming up in Chicago in the fall, so that's a savings if we decide to do something like that.
Yeah.
And they're located in Indianapolis, I think. Is that correct, Paushan?
I don't remember.
I think it's Indianapolis.
I'm
which is
not,
only-
yeah, I'm not sure where their head office was, but yeah.
Dina has a question as well.
Yeah, one of the other things I wrote down is, one of the things that was lifted up is that it would include things like code compliance, fire, police, of course, downtown development, any of those other departments that could be part of this investigative process if it should arise. Will that be included? Because those things, hopefully not often, maybe not ever, but it could, I suppose, if there's discrimination or
Yeah.
something not being followed or somebody not being treated fairly or whatever. Will that be included in this language when it comes to fruition, when it's developed?
Thanks for bringing that up, Dina.
Yep.
I thought that the discussion at the workshop was that, and maybe this is my own interpretation of it, was that the Human Relations Board could serve for many of those things as a liaison or conduit around
Gotcha.
some of the challenges, but that the unique nature of the relationship between policing and community
Okay.
deserved its own space. Okay, and yeah, I think it's just there's a power dynamic there that's different than what the other ones, not that those don't have the same implications, but it felt like this was specific to that. And I don't know if there's any feedback, I can't remember, from the commissioners themselves around that, but
There actually was feedback, and it was one of the reasons why we used the word community, because we had heard that through the Human Relations Board that, that type of review board could expand in beyond the police department. I think to what Kathy shared, and what we heard from commissioners is we will start with the police process for just what Kathy said. It's very specific, it's very specialized, and there's very specific training requirements that will need to take place. And they wouldn't necessarily be the same, for example, if there was a concern from code compliance. And so how do you not overwhelm a board or commission member by saying, okay, for this first year, you got to learn everything police. And then in the second year, you got to learn everything code, building code, enforcement, all, I want to not super tax board members, but, at least 2 or 3 commissioners said they would like to explore that, but understood if we started with the police, because it may be that we have to have a different board. It may be that the Human Relations Board is already a conduit. That's to be determined, but that I appreciate you lifting that up, Dina, because that is still, on the radar, and it certainly was commented by the commission.
Also, you have other boards that perform some of that function anyway. I mean, the Housing Board of Appeals oversees any decisions made by code compliance. So before anything goes to the courts or anything like that, there's always an appeal process. So there are structures that exist. If
Yeah,
it involved modifying some of the role that they play or something like that might be one thing, but already that's there, or planning commission's another one. I mean, anybody proposing a new development, I mean, you know, if it involves city decision-making and a planning decision, it gets reviewed by a board already. You know, that's a pretty robust process, and you know,
well, and so part of the board training might be that the folks on the CROB are intimately familiar with those, so that if they get, like, if they're in relationship with community and they get a question about a decision that was made that would be about planning or be about the housing authority, they'd know where to redirect, right? Or at least just maybe even use the city staff to do that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But because I just really don't know. I have no sense of what these board members will experience out in the community as a result of their positioning, right?
being on the community is one thing, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're out in the community as a city commissioner, you know, you'll get hit with absolutely everything, whether it's germane or not to
Yes.
city function, right? I mean, I get called to all kinds of rescue cats and all kinds of stuff, you know, you know, but in terms of like, if they're coming through some kind of process in terms of who will end up in front of that board with issues that matters, like hopefully city staff or other folks are getting folks where they need to go. I mean, that happens already because folks come with a myriad of issues to city government. And I mean, 311's doing that work all day long, 4-person call center, directing people to where they need to go, getting the right folks. I mean, for better or worse, or whatever we want to say about it. The equity pieces around that, though, part of what drove us to taking a look at this Citizens Review Board was to trying to increase equity in our community, just really broadly speaking, in my take anyway. And like, I just always think that that's valuable in relation to any other city board. And it's something that is sort of our piece of thinking about city government and how it operates, is that we can bring that lens to any aspect of city government, you know, and advise a way, you know, around that. But
For sure. So the next steps, Rebecca.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that, because you're right. We do have several layers in place already to handle questions and concerns that may come up. So one, we don't want to duplicate, but also if, you know, we're always challenged to not do the things the way we have always done it. So while those channels are in place, I think it's healthy for us to say, hey, that is working if you understand that kind of the spectrum, or hey, it's not working from, you know, an equity perspective, or just simply that people don't know this is a step they could take if they have a concern. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I have one, before I talk about next steps, I have one more that really came out from the workshop, and two more things. One is, there was as we were talking, there was a perception that the Community Review and Oversight Board would only see those actions by the police department that were being challenged or questioned. But what I appreciated that Chief Bagley said no is that the Community Review and Oversight Board would get a regular report on all matters happening in the police department, discipline, because sometimes discipline is handled by a sergeant on, you know, at the shift. Then sometimes it has to move up to the chain of command, depending on the complaint or the concern. And, you know, I appreciate the chief saying, yeah, at least on a quarterly basis, this board will get a spreadsheet of these are the things that have happened in the police department in relation to investigations, discipline, complaints, and sometimes kudos, because they do get those as well. So I wanted to make sure that was clear, and we have inserted that language into the document. And then the only other one I wanted to share was that we were asked to address the language around timeliness for completing an investigation. And I get it. Everybody wants to see that move as quickly as possible, but also we know every basically issue, concern, challenge, investigation is different. Some of them can move relatively quickly and probably in less time than we have given ourselves in the document. Others won't be able to do that for a variety of reasons. So I think the language that we're inserting is that, you know, if we can't complete it in this time frame as we were directed by the commission, then we would then the board would have to be notified of such, and then why. and then an estimated of what it, what do we think the time frame would be. So those were kind of the big area. You hit on the ones already as far as the training and et cetera. But next steps are we have to finalize that amended document. And then what we anticipated is that it will come back to the Human Relations Board at the time we send it out to the City Commission to get feedback. And now the commission then can decide if they want to get back together and talk about the amended version. If perhaps maybe we didn't reflect their direction, we could do that in another workshop setting. The commission could also say, hey, I think you have captured everything that we discussed. And you can bring it forward either as a resolution or an ordinance introduction. So those are really the next steps. We're in budget season right now, and also that warm weather makes everybody busier, particularly in the police department. We're shooting for that sometime in June, and that seems so far away when I wrote it down a while ago, but it really isn't, because today is May 17th
10 days.
and we have a holiday in there. So we're anticipating that the amended document that will come back to the HRB and the commission at the same time, because now we've kind of converged the work, and it doesn't need to be them then move forward. I think it can do simultaneously, unless we get feedback that says, yeah, I think still have some hiccups here, and we want to talk about it in whatever forum makes the most sense.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? Outstanding questions or comments?
I just have one.
Yep.
Rebecca, is there still a conversation with Carrie Whitfield ongoing?
Yes, sir, there is.
Okay.
And Carrie will get the amended document at the same time all of you did. He'll probably get that, and then we'll sit down with him one-on-one to make sure that in the areas we can, perfect transparency and honesty, we are not going to align completely with the NAACP proposal. But those concerns that he did lift it up, I think he did lift up, besides, some of the very specific natures, specific actions in the board and their authority. I think we've recognized that in the amended language, because Carrie was the one actually that brought up a lot of, well, if that's the way it's supposed to be, for example, that a citizen member or a community member can reach out to the board, I don't read that in your language. And I appreciated that, because we were thinking it, but we did not communicate that correctly. So I appreciated him saying, we need some more specific language about that, and about regular reports to the board that went beyond even those that would come to the board for official action or review.
Thank you.
Is Bunika's hand really up, or is that
No,
just
that's
the icon?
the thing is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
All right. Are any of our virtual board members have any questions? Just don't unmute yourself if you do. Yeah, Pashan.
I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend the meeting. Was there a discussion about exactly to whom or which body that this board is reporting its findings to?
Great question. The chief answers this one way better than I will. So if I don't do it well, or you still have questions, I will get him to respond as well. But it really, it's hard to say, because it really doesn't, it's the commission's board and commission. They create it and they seat the members. However, the actions, if there is an action that the chief takes that is not sustained by the board, it comes to the city manager for kind of final reconciliation, if I can use that word. So it's a hard question for me to answer, because ultimately there are several areas in which the board will be working with the police department, with the Office of Professional Standards in the police department, with the police chief, and with the city manager. Again, the chief is much more eloquent than I, but we also want to be very careful and mindful that ultimately this is supposed to increase accountability and transparency between the community and the police department. And so we respect that. We're trying to lift that up. So that is my non-police chief answer. And if you would like a better answer or that didn't make any sense, I will make sure that Chief Bagley shares as well.
I think that as we review the document that gets created, there's another way for us to be, hopefully it'll be positioned in there. And if we have any questions that come from it, we can ask that. Chris, did you understand?
No, I just, well, so often those are the things that get talked about with the Citizen Review Board, and sometimes are the things that rise to the top of the conversation. But a piece that sometimes gets left out is that Citizen Review Boards often exist to create accountability with the police department to the community. And so I just want to throw that out there, like that has been a part of our conversation all the way along. So the question of who it gets reported to, that is one that I personally just, that raises questions for me, simply because how are we addressing the questions of accountability? Because that actually was a huge thing. And from the very beginning, I think I've tried to be transparent about my own personal interest in feeling like that was a part of what was driving the interest in a Citizen Review Board. Yes, it was also about improving relations. It was about those other things. And we heard that clearly in the data, but accountability was a strong piece. If we're not addressing that head on or talking about that or articulating how that's happening through what's being proposed, then that seems like it's worth, I mean, if there's interest.
Well, and if I did not accentuate the theme of transparency and accountability, that's on me, because that has been at the forefront of what we were doing, but also finding that line between not violating officers' rights, the law, because let's just say, for example, right now, there is no other mechanism. If there's a complaint from a community member, aside from taking legal action against the city or the officer, there is no other advisory body group that would look at something if there is a complaint from the community and they don't agree with what the chief has ultimately decided, if it's in relation to an officer conduct, use of force, anything like that. So I see that, but remember, I have a lens. I've been doing this work for a long time. And so if we're missing it, and I appreciate Kathy lifting up, if after you read the amended document, you don't see that, then we need to talk.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I think our reaction and our thorough review of the document that the city shares with us is gonna be really important. So let's all make sure we're bringing everything that we've done. Each of us have done our own independent research. We bring a different lens to this. Chris, you're probably most intimately involved in the survey data. So your, lens of what we heard from the community is probably a little sharper than many of ours. So I think that us being able to provide any feedback to you, if we've got enough time to be able to do that, Rebecca, will be helpful.
Yeah, and I think I would ask everybody to take a look at the presentation and the video, because as you walk through, the chief walked through, what does an investigation look like? Who is involved and at what point? I think help to at least educate and inform around that particular process, and where, we feel that the CROB plays into that, because these, an internal investigation is a very sophisticated process, and has to be reviewed regularly just for our own police department's accreditation, let alone it needs to be understood by the community at large. So if there is an issue that needs to be addressed, everyone is clear about how to address that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rebecca. And we've only got about 13 minutes left, and we've got a couple things we want to cover. So I'm going to move to new business, and something that we didn't have on the agenda, but Kimberly and I have talked about, is just her helping us understand the context in which she is working through the equity audit and its recommendations, and the relationship that has with the commission, and any role she'd like the HRB to play in that. So, Kimberly.
Yes, and I will be brief. I did, and I apologize, I did not retain this. I did ask this when I first started. It's a two-part question. did the HRB play any role in the equity audit? And how was the equity audit presented to the HRB after the report was complete?
Rebecca, do you want to answer that from an administrative perspective? Did you hear the question?
I did.
Okay.
I, if you want to answer it, Kathy, but no, I'm more than happy to address that.
Yeah, I would like to check my memory based on what you say.
I was actually going to do the same thing, because you know, once you're over 50, apparently that's not automatic recall.
It is
Um,
not. I'm 54
but-
next week, and I can guarantee that's the case.
I just love that. Anyway, so we're embracing our, as I call it, my senior brain. And, you know, I'm eligible for AARP now, so I need to just embrace that. So, and it felt like the equity audit took forever because it began right before the pandemic. And so, from the time that the city was asked to undertake the equity audit, which was right around the demonstrations and vigils and marches around George Floyd, then the ask came. Then a small group of the African American Collaborative at the Urban League met with the city to kind of put together the scope and et cetera. So we were really working through that group first. And then, you know, the consultants started. So MGT, see, I'm like, is it MGD, MGT? Anyway, they started their work and then the pandemic. And then unfortunately, I think because of the pandemic, pretty much every one of the staff assigned to Battle Creek's equity audit left the company. And so we were reestablished with a whole new team at MGT, and they were great, don't get me wrong, but it made us step back a little bit, make sure that everybody was clear on the scope, and then go forward. So once we actually had a draft document, then it was shared with the Human Relations Board. But actually, MGT did at least one, if not two, presentations to the Human Relations Board about their work, methodology, where they were in the process, and then kind of going through the components of the final report. Does that match what you remember, Kathy?
Yes. Yes.
That's how I remember it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Do.
That's helpful. Thank you. So just real brief, we're still in the planning stages. I will be presenting an action plan to the City Commission in mid-June. And I can share kind of a very scratch surface of some key elements of the action plan. First, there's a foundational component where the city needs to identify a collective vision for what this work means for the city, and a theory of change, and an actual equity statement. And then I have some thoughts about accountability in terms of how that equity statement is operationalized throughout the city. I think the city needs to further define its values. And data should be elevated as a priority. And we need to normalize equity. And then there's a huge training and education component so that we have a shared understanding and knowledge across all city departments. However, I will be recommending a training structure such that there are certain mandatory and then certain kind of a la carte optional if you want to dig deeper. Recognizing that it's not a one size fits all depending on what your role is in city government and what your function is. So while there may be some shared concepts that need to be across the board, how those are applied to the different departments based on their roles may need to be different in terms of how the information is presented or how it lives and is operationalized within that department. The example that I like to give, which was insightful for me, is thinking about culture and having a conversation with the fire department about that culture. They actually live and sleep in the same quarters. Mm-hmm. So that's very different from coming to City Hall for 8 hours a day and interacting. So just those kinds of differences are some foundational elements. And then there's the internal piece. We talked about initially needing to be very internally focused in like this first phase, and then adding on community components. However, as I've been digging into the work, there just are some strong external community components that just have to happen at the same time. So in terms of internal, really focused on systems. So how are we truly embedding equity in our policies and practices? And there are tools and there are ways of performing our duties that will allow us to get to that. Core competencies, again, that goes back to that training and education, and then how are we actually applying this in the work that we do? And how are we being accountable for that? So core competencies would tie into your performance evaluation, et cetera. Again, data and metrics, I'm gonna have my data guru over here. I'm gonna keep hammering the importance of having data-driven strategies and being able to evaluate our work as a component of holding the city accountable to these efforts. And then career pathway is another huge component in terms of recruitment, hiring, onboarding, training, a pathway to advancement, retention. And then, as I've mentioned several times now, accountability. Also internal is the culture. One thing that I think is critical is psychological safety internally. I have seen some charts in the equity audit report that do give me some cause for concern. So that's definitely an area that we'll want to make sure that we're evaluating. A culture of learning and reflection, inclusiveness and belonging. External stakeholder and resident engagement, which we've had a lot of conversation about today. Community partnerships. How can we look at those in terms of transformative work and large scale work? Also access, and again, accountability. So those are kind of broad strokes. There's a lot. And what we talked about via text is that, and it's so funny, Rebecca, because I think sometimes we thinking about the same things at the same time is really becoming a little weird. But I was looking at the schedule to see if I would be able to present the action plan to this board before presenting it to the city commission. And the schedule wasn't working out that way. And so I was trying to figure out those dynamics. Little did I know, at the same time, there were other great minds that were thinking about the same thing. So I think, Kathy, what you propose over text would be if there is this board, whether it's a special meeting or if it's a work session of just those that are interested, that I would be able to present the draft plan. We'd have a deeper discussion and getting buy-in and feedback from this board prior to that presentation to the city commission.
Thank you. So I am, as chair, going to speak on behalf of the board and say, I think that's what we would like to do, right? Is position ourselves well to be of support to this work because it's so important. I don't suggest it has to be the full board, but we can put it out to the full board who's willing. And so if there's a date that you have set, we can send a meeting notice out and just have it. Can that, Rebecca, be just a work session? And does that, if we're not making any decisions and we're just hearing, does that have to be an open meeting?
No,
Okay.
it doesn't. If you put together a subcommittee to discuss that, no, it does not.
Okay, good.
But it also, if we need to adjust the workshop with the commission, we can. I wasn't sure if you said that, but I just want you to know, we could adjust that to allow for, bringing in the HRB.
Okay. That would be another option because that's scheduled for June 13th. And I think the HRB meeting is that's
Like
next week.
Yeah, the
June
21st,
It's a
probably.
lot of a 2 week period.
Yeah. Yep. So consider yourselves invited. We will work out the details logistically as to whether or not they're gonna move the workshop and we can just use our meeting on the 21st for this, because if we don't have any other business to cover, that could take up that time.
Yeah.
Or we could call for a special meeting.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kim. That
Thank
is
you.
not a small feat. So thank you for everything that you're doing. Is there any, I want to just, we've got 2 minutes left. Any, do we have any public comments? Anybody, Lisa, online? No?
No.
Okay. Any board comments? Anybody have anything they want to share? Anything you're hearing out in the community that needs attention? How about my online folks? No, hearing none?
Nothing for me. I just wanted y'all to know I was here, so.
Thank you, Derek, and thanks for checking in on chat. I did see that pop up. Appreciate it.
I've seen interest of community members wanting translation of city documents. So one particular situation was during our housing of appeal meeting. There was a non-English speaking citizen who came in to appeal a violation she had received, spoke no English. Her child had to leave school early to,
Heartbreaking.
yep. And she was just having difficulties connecting to someone even via the phone to say like, I need help because I'm gonna try to get into, and the document came to her in English, so couldn't quite, so it was just a lot of barriers that prevented her or even us from being able to engage with her effectively today.
You know, we don't have time to solve that right
Yeah.
now, but what I'd like to do is say that one of our agenda items for the next meeting is around language access, because this has come up multiple times, right? So is there something that we can support the city around in figuring out what does it look like for us to be more accessible as a city as it relates to language? Because I'd love to hear from the other departments. What are they experiencing? Who's set up to do that well? What do we have in the city that can support that? So I think there's a lot of learning we can do from there. Thank you, Derek. Okay. So I will make sure that that gets prioritized on the next, on agenda. Thank you very much. And we'll see if we can bring some materials in that will be helpful for that. Just a comment that we have some folks whose terms are expiring in July. Chris, thank you for your application, as well as Derek's, and he just
Yeah.
left, but he also submitted his. But we've not heard from Jennifer Greger, Jeffrey Cotton, Amira Austin. Keon and I are gonna actually reach out to those three and just see if they're interested in continuing to serve, because I'd have to submit a new application.
So I would just so I did submit my application, but I've said this every year that I've been a member. I'm happy to not be a member if we want to free up the space
Okay.
to bring someone else. I would still attend because our work in community development intersects with most of the issues that come up here.
Yeah.
And we would like to be in front of this group when we have fair housing issues and other kind of issues. So.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you're a really valuable member, and I appreciate that, and we'll see where we stand on the overall composition of the board, and if that's needed. My term is also up in July, and I want to continue serving, but I don't think I can continue serving as chair. This is a huge year for me professionally, and I'm feeling really pulled, and this deserves somebody who's got the time to do that. So we can discuss that in July when it's time for that, but I just wanted to plant some seeds with the group and let them know. All right, well, I'm going to adjourn us. It's 5:01. It's 5:01 somewhere. Does that mean something? It means something right now. I hope you guys all get out and enjoy this evening, and thank you so much for your continued commitment. Thank you, everyone.